So mine's going to be very brief. I'm just going to be looking at practical ways that we can actually approach these stories and we can report on these stories, because that's essentially where we are at right now. We can have all of this information, but if we don't find a way to be able to tell it in a way that people can understand, people feel connected to, then there really is no point in having all of this information. So I like to look at things that are very practical, things that I can use on a daily basis, things that I can just apply in how I tell my stories, and how I can measure whether my stories are really being impactful and if they are relevant to the audience and the type of audience that I'm looking at telling my stories to. So I like to use this really this really simple way of looking at whether I am meeting the needs of the audience, because our stories really need to be audience focused. It's not about me as an individual, me as Maya, what I feel is important, what I feel I should say, what my opinions are on the piece, and whatever topic it is that I'm talking about. But it really is whether this is fitting to the needs of the audience and whether they feel that they are getting what they want out of the stories. So this is a really simple way of looking at it, just looking at the needs of the audience, 6 different needs that you can look at. And if you just use this as a way to measure whether your story is having impact, it's really easy to look at. So one is, people are looking at, keep me on the trend. What's trending? What's new? What do I need to know about the trends that are going on right now on whatever topics it is? Another one is update me. I want to know what's happening right now. And even as you're updating me, reassure me. We're seeing right now, during the pandemic, transparency of information has been very important, and making sure that we're keeping our audience updated with things, just basic information as far as the number of COVID cases there are right now, the number of vaccines. Vaccines is such a huge topic right now, and people are wanting to stay up to date with the numbers and how governments are planning on getting the vaccines. Are they getting financing for it? Are they getting into debt to get access to these vaccines, etc. The third one is, give me perspective. I want perspective where the analysis comes in. You have all of the numbers, but then give me perspective on what this actually means for me as a citizen, as an individual. Another one is, inspire me. I want to be inspired to be the best version of myself. So give stories that are very inspiring as well, because people are aspiring to do better and be better in whatever sphere that they're in. And then just the simple things like amuse me or divert me. We Kenyans are really good at doing this. We see all these memes that go viral, where we're joking about our politicians, or we're joking about the amount of debt that we're in. So that's also a medium and a way to tell stories, and also to appeal to young people, because young people like to laugh and also like to just be amused and entertained. So that's also another medium of you telling stories. And educate me. I want to be educated about things that I don't know, and I want you to be able to relay this information in a way that I can really, really understand. So when you're thinking about your news stories, you need to think about what your lead line is. What is your top line? What is new, not just new, but what's interesting, what's strange, what's significant, and not just repeating the same things over and over again. I think I heard someone talking about yesterday and the budget coverage and looking at the different media houses and how they're covering the stories. What are you adding? What is different, and what value are you adding for the audience? You want to make sure that as they're flipping through channels, they are finding something different that you are offering out of all of the, hundreds of media houses that there are out there. So also another way of looking at how you want to tell the stories is the types of stories that you want to tell. And there are 7 basic plots that you can look at in how you tell the story that we as human beings like to connect with, and that we relate to, and that also makes us pay attention. One is overcoming the monster. Looking at what this menace is. What is this issue that is really threatening humankind? So in this sense, it would be debt that we're looking at, which is the obstacle or the monster. But then the story that you're really bringing out is how are people actually overcoming the monster? What are some of the tactics that they're using, and to come out triumphant out of it? The other story that people really connect with and want to hear more about is the rebirth, the story of renewal, the story of hope, the story of inspiration and redemption. Those are the kind of stories people like to hear about. The quest is one as well, the quest of, the person that's looking to solve the story. Looking to solve the issue. How are they solving these obstacles? What are some of the tactics that they're using? A really good story on the quest is last year we saw the quest to finding a vaccine. And that was something that people were following every single day. The research that was coming out, the development that was coming out, people had lots of questions about variants. And it still is a quest right now, the quest to vaccinate, the global population, the African population and all that. So that's another way of telling the story. And also the story on the journey and the return. Rags to Riches is also a really good one, where you pick a very strong character who against all odds is able to solve issues. People really love those sorts of stories. You pick a character that seems small, that seems insignificant, that seems to not be able to make any impact in the world, but somehow through against all odds, was able to rise above. The story of tragedy is also one, because you want to really appeal to the audience and make them care about whatever issue it is. So the dark side of humanity and how it's impacting people. During this pandemic, we've seen lots of stories come out about lives lost, and also people not being able to access healthcare and things like that, jobs lost and things like that as well. And also, this one is a very difficult one, but then comedy is also a really good way of being able to break down big topics and subjects in a way that people will find interesting and will want to watch. I really personally love Trevor Noah, because I think he does a really good job at that. He does an incredible job in taking very complex topics, very difficult subjects that may seem difficult to understand and uninteresting, and he tells it in a very clever way that is funny and that people would, want to watch. Another thing I like to do is, in my process of looking at stories, is looking at the elements of the stories and a shopping list, really, of the things that I really need to make sure that my story has. One is a setting. So you need to look at where your story is and what mood your story is carrying. Is the mood anxious? Is it hopeful? Is it one of excitement? Is it one that is full of fear? There's a story that I just did recently, which was looking at vaccine manufacturing across the continent, and also just the financing that's going towards building the capacity to manufacture our local vaccines. And of course, the setting right now is that people are very anxious. People are wondering where it is that they're going to get their next dose from. People are wondering why it is that Africa doesn't have the capacity to manufacture their own vaccines. So that is the setting of my story. And then the second thing that you want out of your story is that you want to have characters, very strong characters that can carry the issue, the topics, the things that you want to bring out of your story. So who are the people that you're going to be focusing in your story? Who's your main character, but also who are your supporting roles? I think Wahika spoke about telling different sides of the story. This is where you really think about your strong characters that can bring out those different perspectives. So for my vaccine manufacturing stories, I looked at my different characters who could, bring something different to the table. I brought 2 case studies out. One was a pharmaceutical company that has been wanting to manufacture vaccines for a really long time, but then they haven't been able to build the capacity to do so because of lots of barriers. So I wanted that character to bring out what the specific barriers are in financing, the specific barriers are in, building capacity, facilities that are needed for vaccine manufacturing. And then I brought out a second company that has secured financing from India to build a vaccine manufacturing plant here in Kenya. So that's a different story. That's a story of hope that, we do have a way forward, and that something really is being done, and that there is hope in this situation, that not all is lost. But then also you want to be able to hold power to account. So I brought in the World Health Organization to talk about the COVAX scheme, to talk about what their thoughts are on the financing of the vaccine procurements. What plans do they have? Because our countries are running out of vaccines, and the COVAX facility, which mainly had India procure the vaccines, they're no longer exporting anymore, so no one really is certain about where the vaccines are coming from. So holding power to account there, and also giving people a sense of, a way forward, that there is something that is happening. And then I looked at an organization called AVMI, the Africa Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative, for their opinions and their recommendations on what they think should be the way forward, because building the capacity is not going to be a day or 2 days, or it's going to be a long-term focus. So what they think governments should look at right now. That gives the policy perspective, it gives the regulators perspective, it gives the manufacturers perspective, and in it as well, you're giving the ordinary citizens perspective as well, and how they are being affected by it. So aside from the characters, you also want to look at what are some of the complications, some of the challenges in your stories, and bringing that out really, really well. What happened? Why? How did we get here as a continent? Why do we not have, vaccine manufacturing capacity as well? And then now looking at addressing or responding to the situation. Who is addressing the situation? How is it that they're addressing the situation? And then ending the story with some kind of closure, just having some kind of resolution at the end of the story, so that it's well knit at the end. You need to remember that your story is basically taking your audience on a journey. And you want to take them to a complete journey all the way to the end. So you may not be able to break down everything, but sometimes you might be able to give your audience a bit of closure just by focusing on that one thing. So while the financing aspect of it, there's so much when it comes to vaccines and, and procurements and all that, but I decided to just focus on one thing, which is vaccine manufacturing. How did we get here, and what is the way forward? That was the focus of my story. I could go into so many other things, but you really don't have the time to be able to do that. So being able to really narrow down and focus on your story. Now, looking at the process, I know these are very basic things, but they're very practical, and they do help you just have some structure in how you approach your storytelling. So the process, of course, getting ideas, and I think that planning and preparation is really, really important. Depending on whether you are a writer, whether you're doing it for online, whether you're doing it for a newspaper article, or you're doing it for TV, or you're doing it for digital, having some sort of structure in your mind and a plan on how you're going to do the story is really, really important. When I am crafting my story, I go as detailed as even looking at the shots, what kind of shots I would need. So if I'm doing a vaccine manufacturing plant, I'm thinking about packaging, processing, I'm thinking about factory shots, people in their factory shots, and all of those kind of things. Just going down to the very details of the kind of shots that you would need to tell the story. And then preparation is really, really key. Don't go into an interview not having a very structured way of how it is that you're going to ask questions, having clear and concise questions, and having pre-interviews with your characters before you even go to location, before you even go to on set. For me, for this vaccine manufacturing story, I worked on it for about 2 months, just speaking to the characters of the story to really be able to understand in depth what the issues are, so that I know what to expect when I'm going on location. You don't want to go on location and find that it's a completely different story than what you thought. And sometimes you might have an idea of what you think the story is, and then you speak to the characters of the story, and you realize that actually the situation and the reality on ground is completely different than what I thought it would be. So that's why pre-interviews are really, really important, so that you don't find yourself stuck and you don't find yourself, just not knowing where to go next with your stories. So the preparation part is important. And then, of course, the collection of you doing the news gathering stuff now, where you go out and you get your shots, you get your interviews, you get all of that. And going back and writing your story. Don't be afraid to rewrite your story Don't be afraid to revise that. Don't be afraid to even, your story might completely change once you go and you gather the content, and you might find that it's completely different than what you had in mind at first. So you edit, rewrite, revise over and over again until you feel that you've really captured the essence of the story the best way that you can. So those are just some of my tips. I believe in just practical ways of you being able to do stories and to tell stories, and practical ways of you to bring creativity in it as well. Because we can get lost in all of the information, but if we don't look at how we approach it, then we've really lost the whole purpose of it, which is just having impact in our stories that we tell. Yeah, that's it from my end. I don't know if there are any questions.
Thank you, Maya, for the good presentation. Now, when it comes to the choice of the people to interview, in case of COVID, for instance, the actual main sites, how do you decide? Because you might also encounter skeptics who are authorities in that area. How do you navigate through that? Thank you.
So how do I decide who to interview? Who my... All right, I'll answer that in two different sections. I think, first of all, you need to decide you need to know who your audience is. So, and where your story is set. And who will be watching your story, who will be reading your story, because that will determine who you will speak to. If I'm just catering for the Kenyan audience, then it may just make sense for me to just speak to people who are based here in Kenya. But then if I'm working for an international media house, then I need to start thinking about how to make that a Pan-African story and how to represent different parts of the continent. So in my story, I spoke to someone in South Africa, I spoke to someone in Nigeria, I spoke to someone in Kenya as well. So that helps you also just determine that, like, who is your primary audience and who are you targeting. And then I think also when you're choosing who you should interview, you really need to think about what new aspect they're bringing to the table. So that everybody brings out a different aspect and you're not having something that is very repetitive. You want to be able to have somebody who's in authority. You want to be able to have somebody who is just, the ordinary person, the ordinary citizen. And then you want to look at your storytelling where somebody is able to tell the story of what the problem is and explain what the problem is, and somebody who's able to tell the solutions, to give the solutions of whatever topic and issue that is. So you want to have it from up here and then trickle it down, and that way you make sure that everybody brings something different, to the table. I hope that answers your question. I don't know, any other questions?
On my end.
Thank you for a very good and practical presentation, Maya. My question is, as we strive to tell the story of debt to newer, younger audiences and reached, sort of the unreached, where do you find the balance between remaining true to the basics of journalism vis-a-vis dumbing down your story? Like, where do you decide, like, I can make it fun and interactive, etc., but is there a limit to how far you can go? And I think that's the struggle sometimes, that you really want to break it down to its bare bones, but at the same time, as a journalist, you don't want to be accused of telling shallow or stories that would not meet a particular test. How do you decide what angles to chase a story with to ensure that you remain true to who you are, but that your audiences can actually understand what you're telling them?
No, I think that's a very interesting story. I remember, a question to ask, because I remember even as we joined the BBC, even just the question of how we dress became such a big debate, because there's a perception that people are not going to take you as seriously, or you're not able to speak with authority just based on how you dress, and you need to be, you know, dressed in a suit or whatever for people to take you seriously. So we really experimented a lot with that, and we experimented a lot with just thinking outside of the box and taking a CEO out, you know, to play golf while you're having an interview, rather than sitting in a hotel, structured, you know, and making it so unrelatable. So sometimes that line is really difficult to cross, and it's really difficult to define for yourself. But as long as you're able to explain it to, for me, I use my 15-year-old as an example. If I'm able to explain it to him, you're not changing the meaning of the story, you're not changing the content of the story, but you're changing the way that you package it. So it's not that you are making a story shallow or that you're not going in depth, but it's just that you are changing how you package it and how you tell the story, so that it's in a way that is digestible for young people. Yeah, so that's what I would say, is that don't think that just because you're simplifying a story and you're simplifying your language, that you are dumbing down the story, or that you're not being shallow, or you're not being deep enough. You're just changing the way that you are packaging it for people to be able to understand.
Thank you.
It's a good question.
We have a question from Burundi. Burundi would like to come in. Yeah, Burundi, we are crossing over.
Yes. Thank you once again, Maya, for your real and rich presentation. So now, my question is this. Due to your speed and language, can you please share with us your presentation in terms of stories? Thank you.
In terms of?
Since you spoke fast, so thank you. Yeah.
Merci
Thank you,
beaucoup,
Burundi.
Maya, pour votre présentation. Ma question est celle-ci.
Thank you, Maya, for your presentation. Now, in a country where the social reason does not respond to the economics reason, how can you tackle such a topic, such a story? Second question: in a country where there is corruption, where there is a lot of corruption, and people who are influencing others to bribe, now how can we tackle such a topic? So long as you know that there are signs that show that you can be eliminated physically. So if, for instance, you have an information that you wish to share with others, with the rest of the world, how can you do it without jeopardizing your life?
Wow.
Thank you.
That is a powerful question, and I think that the responsibility also lies with our media houses as well. Is that, are they offering some level of protection? And what kind of editorial guidelines do you have? What sort of mechanisms is it that you have in protecting yourself and protecting your identity? I know that for the BBC, we do heavy investigative journalism work, and sometimes we have to go through great lengths to be able to protect our whistleblowers, protect the people who are giving us access to this information, but also protect some of our journalists that are telling these stories. So it's looking at the policies. What do you have in terms of protection? Is there some kind of protection, legal protection, that the media house that you're working for has as well? Getting some legal advice is extremely important. And when you talk about safety in reporting some of these, dangerous stories, make sure that your safety comes first. So don't rush to break the story, to break the news. Have people that you trust, and have a team by you, a legal team with you that can advise you on how to go about the story in a safe way to make sure that, you know, your life is not in danger and your life is not jeopardized. Don't rush to tell the story. If it's going to take you 6 months, 1 year, however long it will take you to cover that story, your safety as a journalist is extremely important. Having the discussions, you know, with your editor, your line manager, whoever it is that is looking after you, if you have any areas of concern in following that story. And sometimes you may want to do these things anonymously, if you are, especially in a country that's very difficult, or using mediums that, you know, are safe for you to tell the story. There are lots of organizations out there that support investigative journalists to make sure that they are safe in them telling their stories.